Between 6 in the morning and noon, heart attacks are 40% more likely than any other time of day. Strokes are 49% more likely. And the thing driving those numbers is not your diet, not your medication, not your cholesterol. It is a 4-minute window right after you open your eyes. Most people hand that window to habits that quietly make things worse. I am going to show you exactly which ones, and the fix for each one takes less than 2 minutes. I spent years in the emergency department seeing the aftermath of this, and the pattern was hard to ignore. The calls that came in between 6 and noon were different from the ones that came in at 2 in the afternoon. They were more serious. They happened to people who had been managing their health well, people who had no obvious reason for a crisis that morning. What those mornings had in common was this: a body pushed past its limit during the exact window it was least equipped to handle the extra load. What country are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments, because this window works the same way in every body, regardless of zip code. Here is what is actually happening. Every single morning, without exception, your cardiovascular system goes through something called the morning surge. Blood pressure spikes sharply. Cortisol and adrenaline flood your system. Heart rate climbs. This is not a problem. This is normal physiology. Your body has been doing this every morning of your life since before you were old enough to know it was happening. But here is what most people have never been told: the surge does not care whether your arteries have a little flexibility left or whether they have been quietly stiffening for years. And that distinction, that is everything. Younger arteries act like new garden hoses. You can bend them sharply and the pressure distributes. Older arteries are more like aged rubber tubing left in the sun. They are still functional, but they do not absorb sudden pressure the same way. A study published in the American Journal of Physiology confirmed this directly. Arterial stiffness, measured by pulse wave velocity, is one of the key mechanisms that turns a normal morning surge into a cardiovascular event in older adults. The surge itself did not get bigger. The buffer got smaller. Now, in between 6 and noon, that same window where the surge is happening, here's what the research shows across large studies. Heart attacks are 40% more likely than they would be if events were randomly distributed across a day. Cardiac deaths run about 29% higher. Strokes come in at 49% more likely. Those are not small numbers. And here is something that surprised even me when I dug into this. It is not just time of day, it is time of week. Research published in the journal Hypertension found that the morning blood pressure surge is actually its highest on Monday mornings, specifically, and in winter, it climbs further still. Cold exposure increases what researchers call active sensitivity, the degree to which your blood pressure reacts to the same amount of physical activity. In winter, the same walk to the kitchen can trigger a larger pressure response than it would in July. So, Monday mornings in January, if you are over 60, if you have any history with blood pressure, that is a window worth treating gently. Not with fear, with a little extra care for the first 20 minutes. Now, I want to tell you something that might shift how you have been thinking about your mornings. None of what we are about to cover requires anything dramatic, nothing extreme. I am not going to ask you to overhaul your schedule. I am going to ask you to adjust 4 things, and the combined time investment is under 6 minutes. But before I show you those 4 habits, I need you to understand one piece of biology, because without it, the adjustments are just rules. With it, they make complete sense and they stick. Here is what is happening in the first 15 minutes after you open your eyes. Your body is making a demand on your cardiovascular system that it will not make at any other point in the day. Blood pressure is rising, stress hormones are spiking, blood is shifting from the relative stillness of sleep to the full demands of being upright and active. Your cardiovascular system is managing 3 major transitions simultaneously. Think of it like a furnace that has been on low heat all night, suddenly being asked to heat the whole house at once. The furnace can do it, But if you open every window at the same moment, you crank the thermostat. You are asking a lot more of the system all at once. That is what four common morning habits do. They open the windows. Um, Walter is 67, a retired mail carrier from Nashville, Tennessee. 31 years on a walking route had left him in decent shape for his age, but his blood pressure had been creeping up over the past few years. His doctor had it managed. His numbers at every appointment looked reasonable. Walter had no reason to think his mornings were part of the problem. He had done them the same way for decades. I am going to come back to Walter in a moment because what changed for him was not what his doctor prescribed. The first habit, rising from bed too quickly. This one does not look like a cardiovascular habit. It looks like a personality type. The people who bound out of bed the second the alarm goes off tend to think of it as a sign of discipline. But here is what is physically happening in those first seconds. You go from horizontal to vertical in under 5 seconds. Gravity immediately pulls a significant volume of blood downward into your legs. Your cardiovascular system has to respond instantly to compensate. Normally, it does this beautifully, but it needs a moment. And right now, that moment does not exist because it is also managing the morning surge simultaneously. This is the mechanism behind orthostatic hypotension, the brief drop in blood pressure that happens when you stand up too fast. It becomes more common as we age, and research confirms it carries real consequences beyond just feeling momentarily dizzy. Falls are the most obvious risk, but repeated episodes of sudden standing also contribute to the cumulative burden on the cardiovascular system during a window already under strain. What it can feel like a brief dimming of vision right after you stand. A second or two of unsteadiness, a flutter in your chest. Most people dismiss these as being groggy. They are not. They are your body signaling that the transition happened too fast. The adjustment: remain seated on the side of the bed for 1 to 2 minutes before standing, feet on the floor, a few slow breaths. Let blood pressure and heart rate stabilize before you go vertical. That is it, 90 seconds. And it pairs naturally with the next habit I'm going to show you, which turns that pause into something even more productive. The second habit, coffee before anything else. Dorothy is 72, a retired school librarian from Des Moines. She had made coffee the first act of every morning for 40 years. Not because she was particularly attached to the ritual, it had simply never occurred to her that the timing mattered. Caffeine activates your sympathetic nervous system, the same fight or flight system already ramping up as part of the natural morning surge. Research has consistently shown that caffeine produces a measurable acute rise in both blood pressure and heart rate after consumption. And the key word there is after, because if you drink coffee, the moment you wake up, that caffeine response does not happen in isolation. It lands directly on top of the surge that is already in progress. Now, this is not about caffeine being dangerous. For most people with healthy hearts, it is not. It is about stacking two activators at the same time during your most vulnerable window when your arteries already have less give than they used to. The adjustment is simple and requires nothing you do not already have. Drink a full glass of water as the very first thing you do after that minute or two on the bed edge, then wait 20 minutes before coffee. That delay gives the natural surge time to settle before the caffeine hits. And that glass of water is doing something important by itself, which brings us to habit 4. But first, habit 3, because this is the one that surprises almost everyone. The third habit, extreme shower temperature immediately. Frank is 70, a retired contractor from Pittsburgh. He had taken a scalding hot shower every morning of his adult life and considered it part of what kept him sharp. He would have laughed at the idea that a shower temperature was something worth thinking about from a cardiovascular standpoint. He was not wrong to trust his routine. For most of his adult life, it was fine. But here is what changes. Very hot water causes your blood vessels near the skin to dilate rapidly, dropping blood pressure somewhat suddenly. Very cold water does the opposite. triggering a rapid constriction and a sympathetic nervous system spike similar to the caffeine response. Either extreme, landing on a cardiovascular system already managing the morning surge, is asking your blood vessels to do significant work during a window. They are already working hard through blood vessel stiffness. The same mechanism that makes the surge more dangerous with age also makes rapid temperature driven changes more demanding. Younger, more flexible vessels absorb these shifts easily. Vessels that have lost some elasticity handle the same shift with more effort. The adjustment: start lukewarm, not cold, not scalding, ease in. If you enjoy a hot shower, go there after a few minutes. You are not giving up anything except the jarring opening moment. A consistent observation among people who switch to lukewarm openings is that they feel more grounded stepping out. The lightheadedness some experience after a very hot shower is a pressure response. Avoiding it feels noticeably different within a few days. Now, here is the habit that changes the entire conversation. Habit 4: not drinking water first thing. Here is why this is the one I see skipped most consistently. It does not feel urgent. There is no sensation telling you your blood volume is slightly reduced. But overnight, even during normal sleep, you lose fluid through breathing and through the body's standard overnight processes. You have gone 7 or 8 hours without replacing any of it. That mild reduction in blood volume is a genuine stressor. Your cardiovascular system is already managing the surge. Now it is doing it with slightly less fluid in circulation. Think of trying to pump water through a system where the tank is at 80% instead of full. The pump works harder for the same output. The adjustment: 8 to 12 ounces of water, room temperature, before anything else, before coffee, before your phone. It pairs directly with the bed edge pause from habit 1. Sit on the edge of the bed. Reach for the water glass you set on the nightstand the night before. Drink it while you let your blood pressure stabilize. 2 habits, one sitting. Now, Walter. What changed for Walter was not dramatic. His doctor mentioned, almost as an aside at one appointment, that when he took his blood pressure medication might matter as much as whether he took it. A growing body of research, including a Cochrane review, suggests that for many people on antihypertensive medications, taking them at bedtime rather than in the morning produces meaningfully better control of both nighttime blood pressure and the morning surge without changing the drug or the dose. Walter asked about it at his next appointment. His doctor switched his evening timing. 3 months later, his morning readings, the ones he had been taking right after the bed edge pause, were running consistently lower than they had in 2 years. This is not advice to change your medication timing without talking to your doctor. It is an example of why the morning window is worth bringing up specifically, not as a general health conversation, as a targeted question. Given my blood pressure history, is there anything about how or when I take my medication that could be working better for me during the morning surge? Most people never ask that question. It never occurs to them that the timing of a medication they take every day could be a meaningful variable. It often is. Here is something else worth knowing. Poor sleep the night before directly amplifies the morning surge. Research has shown that even a single night of fewer than 5 or 6 hours of sleep can raise next day blood pressure by 5 to 10 points in some people. People averaging fewer than 6 hours regularly face a 20 to 30% higher risk of developing hypertension over time, according to studies involving tens of thousands of participants. This is not a sleep lecture, but it is worth knowing that if you are doing everything right in the morning and your mornings still feel hard, the night before is part of the picture. The surge does not happen in isolation from the sleep that came before it. Here is what brings all of this together into something you can actually act on. At your next appointment, bring 5 questions. Write them down before you go. First, based on my blood pressure history, is my morning surge something we should be monitoring specifically? Would home readings taken right after I sit on the bed edge for a minute give you useful information? Second, given my current medications, is there anything about timing, including whether I take them morning or evening, that might be better matched to how my blood pressure behaves overnight and in the morning? Third, I sometimes notice brief dizziness or a flutter right after standing in the morning. Is that something worth evaluating, or is it something I should simply manage by rising more slowly? Fourth, is my caffeine timing something that factors into how my blood pressure behaves in the morning, given the medications I am on? Fifth, what should I treat as an emergency in the morning hours versus something to bring up at my next visit? Chest discomfort, sudden weakness, vision changes. A physician who gets those questions knows they are talking to someone, paying attention. The conversation that follows is more specific, more useful, and more likely to lead to something actionable than a general check in. If you want to track whether these adjustments are making a difference, a home blood pressure monitor gives you actual data instead of a feeling. Take a reading right after the bedage pause, before coffee, before anything else. Do it every few mornings. Note the number. Over 4 weeks, you will have something real to look at. The first day you take that reading, write down how you typically feel in the first 5 minutes after waking. Foggy, energized, occasionally lightheaded, whatever is honest. Revisit that same question in 30 days. This is not about perfection. It is about reducing unnecessary load during a window your cardiovascular system is already navigating under its highest daily demand. The adjustments compound. One glass of water plus one extra minute on the bed edge plus a 20-minute coffee delay plus a lukewarm shower opener. None of those changes feels significant on its own. Together, they remove 4 layers of additional demand from a system doing its most challenging work. Before you have finished your first sentence of the day, you are not doing anything wrong by how you have started your mornings until now. Most people have simply never had this window explained to them clearly with the specific numbers that show why it matters. You have that now. Start tomorrow morning with one glass of water. That is genuinely all it takes to begin. Everything else builds from there. If this gave you something useful, subscribe. That is exactly what this channel is built for: honest, evidence based guidance without the noise. And I will see you in the next one. There is one more thing. Next week, I am covering something that happens during the night itself, a pattern in blood pressure that is a stronger predictor of cardiovascular events than what your doctor measures in the office. Most people have never heard of it, and most people with it have no idea it is happening. Now, let me go deeper on each of these 4 adjustments, because knowing what to do and understanding why your body actually responds this way are 2 different things. And the understanding is what makes the habit stick through the weeks when it feels inconvenient. Habit 1: rising slowly. What most people do not know about orthostatic hypotension is that it is not simply about dizziness. When your blood pressure drops suddenly upon standing, your brain compensates by triggering a reflex that narrows blood vessels and speeds the heart. This reflex works well in younger adults. In people over 60, especially those on blood pressure medication, the reflex is slower. The gap between the drop and the recovery is wider. That gap is when falls happen, and falls are not minor for this age group. According to the CDC, falls are the leading cause of injury deaths in adults 65 and older. More than 1 in 4 adults over 65 falls each year. And while not every fall traces back to a blood pressure dip in the morning, orthostatic hypotension is a documented, measurable contributor that is almost entirely preventable by how quickly you rise. But here is what I want you to pay attention to. Beyond falls, that reflex that fires to restore your blood pressure, it creates a demand on a heart that is already working hard, repeated over months and years. That repeated demand during the most cardiovascularly demanding window of your day adds up. It is not one morning. It is 2,000 mornings. The 1 to 2 minute pause on the bed edge is not a frailty accommodation. It is a precision intervention. You are giving the natural surge time to establish before you add the standing transition. 2 separate demands separated by 90 seconds instead of layered on top of each other. A few slow breaths while you sit. Let your feet settle on the floor. You will often notice that the brief Fogginess of waking clears during this pause rather than after you are already standing. That is your signal that the transition is happening at the right pace. Habit two, coffee timing. Here is the piece that most people have not considered. Cortisol, one of the stress hormones that peaks during the morning surge, is also the hormone that caffeine partially mimics in its stimulating effect. When cortisol levels are already elevated after waking, which they are for most people in the first 90 minutes of the day, caffeine adds a second signal to a system already sending that signal. Research on cortisol rhythms suggests that the natural cortisol peak after waking typically occurs somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes after you open your eyes. Waiting until after that peak, or at least until you have given the initial surge 30 minutes to settle, means caffeine is arriving when cortisol has already begun its natural decline. The two activators are no longer simultaneous. The stack is broken. You do not have to wait an hour. 20 minutes is a meaningful buffer. 30 is better. And in between, that glass of water you drank while sitting on the bed edge is already doing something for your blood volume before the caffeine has any effect at all. If you drink coffee and take blood pressure medication, timing matters in another direction too. Some calcium channel blockers and ACE inhibitors interact with caffeine in ways that affect how both behave in the body. Your doctor knows your specific medications. Ask them directly whether your coffee timing and your medication timing have been considered together. That is a question most people never think to ask. It often has a simple, useful answer. Habit three, shower temperature. Here is the physiology. In plain terms, blood vessel dilation and constriction are not instantaneous. They are smooth muscle responses that take seconds to complete. In a vessel with good elasticity, those seconds are not an issue. The vessel accommodates the change quickly and pressure stabilizes. In a vessel with reduced elasticity, the same response takes longer. During that lag, blood pressure can swing more widely before equilibrating. Step into extremely hot water within minutes of waking, and your vessels dilate. Step out, and the relative cool triggers constriction. Back and forth. In a window where your heart is working harder in that window than at any other point in the next 16 hours. Lukewarm water does not trigger either response significantly. Your vessels stay close to where they already are. Your heart does not have to chase the change, and you can still transition to a warmer temperature once you are a few minutes in. Once the initial surge has had a chance to subside, people who make this shift consistently report something they do not expect. They feel sharper coming out of the shower, not slower. The alertness that extremely hot water seems to provide is partly a stress response. Adrenaline is waking you up. The lukewarm version does not have that spike, but it also does not have the crash that sometimes follows. You come out clearer because your system has not been put through an unnecessary oscillation. Habit four, morning hydration. You lose approximately 400 to 600 milliliters of fluid overnight just through breathing and normal metabolic processes. That is between 14 and 20 ounces. You are not severely dehydrated when you wake up, but your blood volume is measurably lower than it will be after you drink. Here is why that matters specifically in the morning. Your heart pumps harder when blood volume is lower. The technical term is increased cardiac output per stroke. To move the same amount of blood to the same places with less fluid in circulation, the heart has to work harder per beat. This is a small effect, but it is happening at the same time as the morning surge when your heart is already working harder than usual. 8 to 12 ounces of room temperature water. That is all. Room temperature matters slightly because very cold water can trigger a brief vascular response similar to the shower issue, and extremely hot water can cause a transient blood pressure drop in some people. Room temperature water supports blood volume without triggering either response. The nightstand trick matters more than it sounds. If the glass is there when you open your eyes, you drink it during the bed edge pause. If you have to get up and go to the kitchen to find water, you are already standing before you have had any. The sequence falls apart. Friction is the enemy of new habits. Place the glass on the nightstand tonight. The one night setup eliminates the decision entirely. Now, back to Walter. 3 months after the medication timing conversation, Walter started tracking his morning readings, taken consistently right after the bed edge pause before coffee. His systolic numbers had run in the range of 138 to 145 for most of the previous year. After the timing change, they were consistently landing between 122 and 128. His doctor did not change his medication, she only changed when he took it. Walter told me the most noticeable thing was not the numbers, it was that the mornings felt different, not dramatic. He did not feel like a different person. He felt like the same person, starting the day from a slightly more solid place. Less of that first 10 minutes groggy unsteadiness, less of the sense that his body was fighting to catch up with being awake. That is what removing unnecessary load from the morning surge actually feels like from the inside. Not transformation, stability, which is exactly what a cardiovascular system under less unnecessary pressure should feel like. Here's what I want you to take into this next week. You do not need to do all four things on the first morning. One is enough to start. Pick the one that sounds most like your current habit pattern. If you are someone who bounds out of bed, start with the pause. If coffee is your first act every morning, start with water first and wait 20 minutes. If you run an extremely hot shower, try a lukewarm start for 3 days and notice how you feel getting out. If water in the morning has never been part of your routine, set the glass on the nightstand tonight. Week one is about picking one and making it reflexive. That is the only goal. One habit done consistently. Here's what most people get wrong at this stage. They try to do all four at once. And when the morning feels rushed, they skip all four. One is not a compromise, one is the strategy. Week two, you add the next. Week three, they start to connect into a single short routine that takes less than 5 minutes before any of your normal morning activities begin. By week four, most people find they do not have to think about it. The sequence has become the default. And by that point, if you have been taking consistent morning blood pressure readings, you will have 4 weeks of data showing you whether these habits are actually moving your numbers. Real data, not a feeling. That is the difference between a habit that is good for you in theory and a habit that has evidence behind it specific to your own body. The 30-day data is yours. Bring it to your next appointment. If you are finding this useful so far, hit like. Not because it helps the algorithm, though it does, because it tells me to keep making content at this level of detail rather than pulling back. The next section is where most people start to wonder whether these habits actually change numbers or just change how they feel. The answer is both. And the data is clearer than you might expect. Here is what the research says about expectation. Most people who make all four of these changes do not notice anything dramatic in the first week. What you tend to notice is an absence of something, less of the first 10 minutes fogginess, less of the minor heart flutter when you stand, less of the brief unsteadiness. These are not glamorous improvements. They're also the kind of improvements that are easy to dismiss because they are defined by what did not happen. Pay attention here. Week two is when blood pressure readings, if you are taking them, start to show something interesting. Not necessarily a dramatic drop, consistency. The variation between your highest and lowest morning readings starts to narrow. By week three, most people notice the routine has become automatic. They are not deciding to do the four things. They are doing them in the same order every morning without thinking about it. That is the target. A sequence so practiced it requires no willpower to execute. Week four and beyond is where the data starts to matter. 4 weeks of morning readings taken consistently before coffee, after the pause, gives you and your doctor something real to look at together. You are not bringing them a feeling, you are bringing them a trend. Now, here's something I want to be direct about. These four habits are not going to replace medication if you need it. They are not going to undo years of arterial stiffness overnight. What they do is remove four unnecessary stressors from your body's most demanding daily window. That removal is cumulative, compounding, morning by morning. It adds up across days, across weeks, across years, and it costs nothing. Zero. No products, no supplements, no prescriptions required, just sequencing and a glass of water on a nightstand. The people, in my experience, who see the most benefit from this are the ones already on medication and already managing their blood pressure. Not because the habits do more for them than for others, but because they are already paying close attention. They are more likely to take morning readings. They are more likely to notice the consistency improving, and they are more likely to bring the data to their doctor and have the specific conversation about timing that can make the medication they already take work better. You are watching this. That already puts you in that group. You are paying attention. The habits themselves are simple enough that paying attention is the only real variable.